Das Wort hat jetzt für die Europäischen Konservativen und Reformisten Herr Abgeordneter Callanan.
Vielen Dank, Frau Bundeskanzlerin. That's the extent of my German. The German members have been extensively tutoring me on that small little bit. As the first British MEP to speak in this debate, and as an occasional reader of Der Spiegel, let me start by saying that I hope that you're not getting too much of these Muppets, Statler and Waldorf, in what people are saying to you today. Frau Merkel, I wish that more EU nations had Germany's economic discipline and enterprising spirit, because if they did, I think we'd be meeting here today under entirely different circumstances. And I personally have a great deal of sympathy for German taxpayers, because they were never told 15 years ago that this major EMU project would require them to make such large sacrifices to sustain the single currency. And I think that if I were one of those German taxpayers, I think I would probably agree with your CSU or FDP colleagues, such as Mr. Söder or Mr. Westerwelle, and oppose more German money being used to prop up the Eurozone. And incidentally, I'd also be quite frustrated that their group leaders of those parties in the Parliament here are saying such completely different things to their parties at home. But if I was a German politician, I think I would also be quite eager to force fiscal responsibility onto some Eurozone governments. And I agree with you that fiscal conservatism is in fact common sense. And as another famous woman politician once reminded us, Margaret Thatcher, the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. And if my money were used as a backstop for the euro, then I think I also would want to put in place foolproof measures to see that simply more borrowing and more spending could not take place after those countries had been rescued. The problem, Chancellor, as I see it, is what we are seeing on the streets of Athens today is what happens when economic sovereignty is surrendered to some higher Eurozone authority. It has shown us that if we remove the ability of voters to determine their own economic destiny, then we start the countdown to social unrest, and we may be seeing the same thing starting in Spain as well. And even the greatest optimist can see that the Eurozone governance arrangements that you've talked about today and want to put in place will take years to implement. Even Germany, I'm afraid, doesn't have the kind of money that would buy us enough time for those to be implemented. Already, the banking union timetable has slipped. Opening up the EU treaties would doubtless see many other countries negotiating for their own interests. My own country, I'm sure, would want to see some powers returned back to member states. And as some countries try to push ahead with more political integration, though you have to be aware that this vision is not shared by everybody else in the European Union, and only by listening instead of lecturing those with different points of view will we find a way forward. However, ultimately, the way I see it is that Germany is still left facing the same fundamental choices as it faced 2 years ago. Either you finally deliver the so-called Big Bazooka, use whatever analogy you like, or you allow those countries that are currently suffering under the shackles of an overvalued currency to break themselves free of those bonds. That could be delivered by restructuring the euro, particularly in some of the peripheral areas, or it could mean introducing a stronger currency for core nations, along the likes of the Guldenmark proposal of Professor Markus Kerber. Now, my group does not want to see the euro fail. However, we do want to put this crisis behind us so that we can start to focus on what should be our real challenge here in Europe. The challenge that is Europe's collective lack of global competitiveness. Our share of world trade is slowly declining. In the end, the root of all of our economic problems is our lack of strong growth, and achieving that strong growth requires free market economic reforms across the continent. And I hope that you and Germany will take the lead in starting to pursue some of those reforms. Thank you, Chancellor, for coming today.